The salt air of Boston Harbor did not smell of freedom in the winter of 1773. It smelled of wet wool, rotting timber, and the metallic tang of impending violence. Silas Thorne leaned against a stack of cedar crates on Griffin's Wharf, his hands deep in the pockets of a coat that had seen too many winters. At 22, Silas was a man of the docks, a carpenter by trade and a watcher by habit. To his left, the Dartmouth sat low in the water, its hull heavy with the very thing that was setting the city on fire, East India Company tea. To his right, the silhouette of a British naval schooner loomed, the moonlight catching the cruel, rhythmic glimmer of a sentry's bayonet. "They won't let it land, Silas," whispered a voice from the darkness behind a stack of lumber. Silas didn't turn. He knew the voice of Caleb Vance, a fellow woodworker whose blood ran hot with the rhetoric of the Sons of Liberty. Caleb was the kind of man who found a fight in every shadow, but tonight the fight was real. "The governor won't let the ships leave, Caleb," Silas countered quietly, his breath blooming in a white cloud. "And the people won't let the tea touch the soil. It's a stalemate where the only winner is the frost." "Stalemates break," Caleb said, stepping beside him. His eyes were bright with a dangerous, feverish light. "Tonight, at the Old South Meeting House, the talk ends. Sam Adams will give the word. We're tired of being subjects, Silas. We want to be citizens." Silas looked at his calloused hands. He wasn't a political philosopher. He was a man who saw his sister, Martha, stretching a single loaf of bread to last 3 days because the Crown's taxes and the closing of colonial markets had choked the life out of the working class. He saw the regulars, the redcoats, marching through the streets as if they owned the very cobblestones beneath his boots. "Citizenship has a high price," Silas remarked. "The king will call it treason." "Let him," Caleb spat. "I'd rather hang as a rebel than live as a beggar." The cauldron boils. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging Boston into a bruised purple twilight, the city felt like a tea kettle left too long on the flame. Thousands of boots crunched through the slush towards the Old South Meeting House. Silas found himself swept up in the current, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and a growing, gnawing anger. Inside the meeting house, the air was thick with the scent of unwashed wool and guttering candle wax. Over 5,000 people had crammed into a space built for half that number. The murmurs were a low roar, like a distant storm approaching the coast. Silas squeezed onto a bench near the back. Up at the pulpit, the leaders of the resistance spoke. Samuel Adams, a man who looked more like a weathered merchant than a revolutionary, stood with a deceptive, vibrating calmness. Beside him, the wealthy John Hancock looked on, his refined features tight with anxiety. "The grace period is over," a voice shouted from the gallery. "The 20 days are up. If that tea isn't sent back to London by midnight, the customs officers will seize it by force and sell it anyway." A roar of disapproval shook the rafters. Silas felt a vibration in his chest, a mixture of fear and a strange burgeoning hope. For years, the colonies had petitioned, argued, and boycotted. They had asked for a seat at the table, only to be told they were children who must obey their betters across the sea. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country," Adams's voice finally rang out, cutting through the chaos. It was the signal. A shrill whistle pierced the air from the back of the hall. A cry went up, a rhythmic guttural chant, "To the docks! To the docks!" The midnight transformation. Silas didn't make a conscious choice to join. The crowd became a single organism, and he was a cell within it. He followed Caleb into a darkened alleyway behind the meeting house. There, beneath the flickering light of a single lantern, men were smearing their faces with soot and coal dust. Some threw blankets over their shoulders, mimicking the dress of Mohawk Indians. "Why the disguise?" Silas asked, as Caleb handed him a handful of damp charcoal. "It's not just a disguise, Silas," Caleb said, his face already a mask of black streaks. "It's a symbol. We are of this land now. We are no longer the king's Englishmen. Today, we are Americans." Silas rubbed the charcoal over his cheekbones and forehead. The grit felt cold and sharp against his skin. He wrapped a coarse wool shawl around his head. In the reflection of a frozen puddle, he no longer saw the quiet carpenter who worried about his sister's bread. He saw a shadow of a new world. They marched in silence, a ghostly procession of 300 men. There was no shouting now, no drunken revelry. This was a funeral for the old world. When they reached Griffin's Wharf, the British guards stood aside. Perhaps they were outnumbered. Perhaps they saw the sheer, grim determination in the eyes of the Mohawks and realized that a single shot fired tonight would turn the harbor red with more than just tea. The cracking of the chests. Silas boarded the Eleanor first, his boots thudding against the salt-slicked deck. The crew stood back, their faces pale in the moonlight. "We mean you no harm," a leader whispered, his voice low and gravelly. "Step aside, and no blood need be spilled. We are here for the tea, and the tea alone." Silas found himself assigned to the block and tackle. He and 3 others hauled the heavy wooden chests from the hold. They were massive things, weighing hundreds of pounds, lined with lead and filled with the finest Bohea tea. Crack! The sound of a hatchet splitting the wood echoed across the silent water. Silas took his turn. He swung a heavy mallet, the wood splintering under the force of his accumulated frustration. He thought of the Stamp Act. He thought of the Boston Massacre, where the snow had turned red just a few blocks from here. "Eve!" Caleb grunted. Together they lifted the shattered chest to the rail. Silas looked down at the dark, churning water of the Atlantic. With a coordinated thrust, they tipped it over. Splash! A cloud of dried leaves exploded into the air before hitting the water. For 3 hours, the only sounds were the rhythmic cracking of wood and the heavy splashes into the bay. By the end of the night, 342 chests, over 90,000 pounds of tea, lay at the bottom of the harbor. The morning after. As the clock struck the early hours of morning, Silas walked back towards his small cottage. His hands were raw and bleeding, and the soot was etched into the pores of his skin. He stopped at the water's edge. The tide was coming in, and a thick brown crust of tea leaves coated the shoreline like a dirty hem on a dress. "Silas?" He turned to see Martha standing in the doorway of their home. She looked at his blackened face and his torn coat. She didn't ask where he had been. The news had already traveled through the whispers of the night. "Is it done?" she asked softly. "It is," Silas said, his voice raspy. "What happens now?" Silas looked back towards the harbor. In the distance, the masts of the British warships looked like a forest of gallows against the rising sun. He knew the king would not respond with words this time. He would respond with ships, with more soldiers, and with the closing of the port. "Now," Silas said, taking his sister's hand, "the king will show us who he really is, and we will have to show him who we are." The spark had been struck. The fire was yet to come. 3 years had passed since the tea had turned the harbor brown, and Silas Thorne barely recognized the man who looked back at him from the surface of a frozen puddle. The soot of the Mohawk disguise was long gone, replaced by the deep-seated grime of the Continental Army. His carpenter's hands, once skilled at joining fine oak, were now scarred by the recoil of a Brown Bess musket and the biting frost of a New Jersey winter. The spark of 1773 had become a conflagration that was consuming everything Silas once knew. It was late 1776. The high spirits of the Declaration of Independence in July had withered under the relentless pressure of British steel. New York had fallen, the army was retreating, a ragged line of hungry men leaving bloody footprints in the light dusting of snow. "Keep moving, Thorne," a voice barked. Silas looked up to see Caleb Vance. Caleb, once a fiery woodworker, was now a sergeant. The war had not softened him, it had sharpened him into something jagged and dangerous. He wore a stolen British overcoat, the red wool stained a muddy brown to hide its origin. "The redcoats are 3 miles back, and the river is still miles ahead," Caleb growled. "If you lie down now, the frost will finish what the king's lead couldn't." Silas stood, his knees popping like dry twigs. "I was just thinking about Boston, Caleb, about the meeting house. It all seemed so simple then. We throw some tea, the king listens, and we go back to our shops." Caleb laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "That was the dream. This is the waking. There are no shops left, Silas, only the cause." The House of Divided Hearts. By nightfall, the scouting party, Silas, Caleb, and 3 others, reached a small farmhouse on the outskirts of a loyalist-leaning village. The windows were dark, but a thin ribbon of smoke escaped the chimney. "We need supplies," Caleb whispered, checking the flint in his musket, "and intelligence. This is New Jersey. You never know if the man inside is a patriot or a spy for Cornwallis." They breached the door with a sudden, violent thud. Inside, a family sat around a meager table, a middle-aged man, a woman with eyes wide with terror, and a boy no older than 12. "In the name of the Continental Congress, we require quarter and provisions," Caleb announced, his voice echoing off the low rafters. The man stood slowly. His face was pale, but his eyes were hard. "The Congress doesn't pay in anything but worthless paper, Sergeant. I have barely enough to keep my son from starving, and now you come to take the rest." "We aren't thieves, sir. We're your countrymen." "Countrymen?" the man spat. "My brother is with the New Jersey Volunteers, fighting for the crown. My neighbor's barn was burned by patriots last week because he refused to sign your association papers. You haven't brought us a country, you've brought us a mirror and cracked it down the middle." Those words hit Silas like a physical blow. The cracks in the mirror. The revolution wasn't just a war against a distant king. It was a war against brothers, neighbors, and the very fabric of their communities. While Caleb searched the cellar for salted meat, Silas was tasked with guarding the perimeter. He stood near the barn, the wind howling through the gaps in the timber. A movement in the woods caught his eye, a shadow flickering between the bare trunks of the oak trees. "Halt!" Silas cried, raising his musket. The figure froze, then stepped into the moonlight. It was a soldier, but not a redcoat. He wore the green jacket of the Loyalists, the Americans who had chosen to stay with the king. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger, his heart hammered against his ribs. The soldier was younger than Silas. He looked exhausted, his face gaunt with the same hunger Silas felt. "Don't shoot," the boy whispered. His accent was pure Jersey. "I'm just trying to get home. I've had enough of the killing." Silas looked at him. In the moonlight, the boy could have been his own apprentice back in Boston. He was the enemy, but he was also the mirror image of Silas himself. Both were caught in a storm they couldn't control, fighting for abstractions while their bellies groaned for bread. "Thorne, you find something?" Caleb's voice called from the house. The boy's eyes went wide. He looked at the musket in Silas's hands, then at Silas's face. For a second, there was a silent plea, a recognition of shared humanity in the middle of a civil slaughter. "No!" Silas shouted back toward the house. "Just a deer in the brush. It's gone now." He lowered his musket and nodded to the boy. "Run, and don't look back." The boy vanished into the shadows of the forest without a word. Silas stood there, trembling.
He had just committed a form of treason against his own cause, yet for the first time in months, he felt like a man again, not just a weapon. The breaking point. When they left the farmhouse an hour later, Caleb was carrying a sack of grain and a side of bacon. The farmer's wife was weeping in the corner, and the man's face was a mask of pure hatred. "We took too much," Silas said as they marched back toward the main camp. "We took what we needed to survive," Caleb replied coldly. "If we lose this war, Silas, that man and his loyalist brother will ensure we both hang. There is no middle ground anymore. The mirror is broken. You're either on one side of the glass or the other." "And what happens when the war is over?" Silas asked. "How do we live with the people we've robbed? How do we look at ourselves?" Caleb stopped and turned to him. In the dim light, his face looked like a skull. "We don't look at ourselves, Silas. We look at the map. We look at the future. If we win, we're heroes. If we lose, we're ghosts. That's the only math that matters now." As they reached the banks of the Delaware River, Silas looked at the dark, ice-choked water. He thought of his sister, Martha, back in occupied Boston. He wondered if she still had bread, or if she was looking at her own reflection and seeing a stranger. The spark in the harbor had been a moment of unity, a grand gesture of defiance, but the cracks in the mirror was the reality, a messy, painful fracturing of a people. Silas Thorne, the carpenter, realized that even if they won their independence, the scars of how they won it would remain for generations. He gripped his musket and stepped into the boat. The transition was complete. The builder was gone. Only the survivor remained. And ahead of them, across the frozen river, lay a place called Trenton, and the bloodiest winter of their lives.
This is the final chapter of your historical trilogy. While the subtitle After the Party Fades originally belonged to a different era, it perfectly captures the somber, reflective atmosphere of a soldier returning home after the adrenaline of revolution has died down. The Echo of Liberty, Part 3, After the Party Fades. The drums did not beat for a celebration when the British finally marched out of Yorktown in the autumn of 1781. They beat a slow, rhythmic funeral march for an empire. As the red-coated columns passed between the lines of victorious French and American soldiers, the air was eerily still. Silas Thorne stood in the mud, his musket grounded, watching the world turn upside down. He should have felt a roar of triumph. He should have screamed until his lungs burned. But as he watched the British commander's sword being surrendered, all Silas felt was a profound, hollow silence. The party of the Revolution, the wild, intoxicating fervor of the Boston Tea Party, the shared heat of the campfire, the desperate camaraderie of the trenches, was finally over. The music had stopped, the smoke was clearing, and the cold light of a new morning was breaking over a shattered land. The long walk home. It took Silas months to make his way back to Boston. He walked most of the way, passing through towns that were ghosts of their former selves. He saw scorched fields where wheat should have been gold, and stone walls pockmarked by musket balls. His journey was a solitary one. Caleb Vance was not with him. Caleb had stayed behind in a shallow, unmarked grave near a creek in Virginia, his fire finally extinguished by a stray piece of canister shot. Silas carried Caleb's brass compass in his pocket, a heavy, silent reminder of the cost of their citizenship. When Silas finally crested the hill overlooking Boston Harbor, he stopped. The city was still there, but it looked different. The British occupation was long over, yet the scars remained. Buildings were boarded up. The steeple of the Old South Meeting House looked weathered and gray. The harbor, once the site of his greatest act of defiance, was quiet. No chests were being smashed today. Only the gentle lap of the tide against the rotting piers remained. The spark in the harbor had become a memory, etched into the history books before the ink was even dry. The return of the carpenter. Silas reached his small cottage at dusk. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the gate hung on a single rusted hinge. He pushed the door open. "Martha?" he called out, his voice sounding foreign in the quiet room. A woman rose from a chair by the hearth. She was thinner than he remembered, her hair streaked with premature silver. She looked at Silas, not at the hero of the revolution, but at a man whose eyes were too old for his face. "Silas," she whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't run to him. She walked slowly, as if she were afraid he might vanish like a ghost. When she finally touched his arm, she felt the hard, lean muscle of a man who had spent 8 years surviving. "Is it truly over?" she asked. "The fighting is," Silas said, leaning his musket against the wall. "The rest, I don't know." The next morning, Silas went to his old carpentry shop. It was thick with dust and cobwebs. His tools, the planes, the chisels, the saws, were orange with rust. He picked up a mallet, the same tool he had used to smash tea chests on the Eleanor, and struck a piece of scrap oak. The sound was dull. His hands, once capable of the finest joinery, trembled. He tried to carve a simple bevel, but his mind kept drifting back to the cracks in the mirror, to the face of the loyalist boy he had let go in the woods, to the screams of the wounded at Monmouth, and the cold, dead eyes of Caleb Vance. He realized then that the party hadn't just faded, it had changed the very nature of the air they breathed. They were free, yes, but they were also broken. The New Republic. As weeks turned into months, Silas watched the New Republic begin to stir. In the taverns where they once plotted treason, men now argued about constitutions, debt, and federalism. The grand, soaring language of Thomas Jefferson was being pulled down to earth by the reality of empty treasuries and hungry veterans. One evening, a man named Samuel, a former merchant who had lost everything in the war, sat across from Silas in a dim corner of a pub. "We won, Silas," Samuel said, raising a glass of weak ale. "A new nation, our own flags, no more king." Silas looked at the man. "And what do we do with it, Samuel? Half my neighbors moved to Canada, the other half can't pay their taxes. We traded a king 3,000 miles away for a government 300 miles away that still wants our coin." "We build," Samuel replied firmly. "That's what you do, isn't it? You're a builder." Silas looked at his hands. The rust was gone from his tools, but the scars on his palms would never fade. He thought about the spark in the harbor, the night he had helped destroy property to make a point. He realized that destroying was easy, it was loud, it was exciting, and it made for a great story. Building, however, was quiet, it was slow, it was the hard work of joining disparate pieces of wood together to make something that could hold weight. The echo of liberty. A year later, Silas stood on Griffin's Wharf. He was no longer a shadow in a Mohawk disguise. He was a master carpenter, and he was overseeing the repair of the very piers where the Dartmouth had once sat. The sun was setting, casting a long golden glow over the water. A group of young boys were playing nearby, chasing each other with wooden sticks, shouting about redcoats and liberty. They played at war because they didn't know the smell of it. To them, the revolution was a glorious adventure, a party they had missed. Silas watched them for a long time. One of the boys stopped and looked at Silas's old, worn military coat, which he still wore for warmth. "Were you there, sir?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "Did you throw the tea? Did you see General Washington?" Silas looked at the boy's innocent face. He thought of the fire, the blood, and the long, cold nights of Part 2. He thought of the fading of his friends and the silence of the aftermath. "I was there," Silas said softly. "Was it grand?" the boy asked. Silas looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky. He felt the weight of Caleb's compass in his pocket and the strength in his own scarred hands. "It was a long night," he said, "but the morning is yours. Make sure you build something that lasts."
As the boy ran off to rejoin his friends, Silas picked up his saw. The echo of liberty wasn't found in the shouting of the crowd or the thunder of the cannon. It was found in the steady, rhythmic sound of a man working to build a home in a land that was finally, painfully his own. The party had faded, but the light remained. And for Silas Thorne, that was enough. The end.